Sunday morning. This is Bob Brown, and since it is the third Sunday, we have got Cliff Winnig, and I spelled his name right this time. Did you notice that, Cliff?
I did. Thank you, Bob.
Hey, it only takes 12 errors before I can correct. Let's
For
see.
an editor, that's not too bad.
Hey, I have had people make comments occasionally when I post on Facebook that I might once in a while misspell a word. But Cliff,
You?
moi, the one, the only. But tell me about your guest here.
So, long-term and medium-term viewers will remember Wendy Shaffer. She was here for our book banning discussion a few months back, but she is back in a different capacity because even though right now she's wearing headphones, she also wears many hats. Wendy is a writer, a power lifter, and a sometime convention runner, which leads us to today's discussion, which I'm going to include Bob in as well as Wendy. He's sticking around. We're going to talk about the nuts and bolts behind the scenes. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain of conventions, science fiction conventions. And just a heads up that I will probably at some point in the future do a part 2, which will be about big conventions like World Cons and that sort of thing. But today is like convention running 101. So if you've ever attended a convention or been a participant in a convention and wondered how the darn thing works, we're going to talk about that for the next hour. And so Wendy has been the chair of a local to us in the Bay Area convention called FogCon, which started in San Francisco about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, a while.
A while.
Yeah. It would have to be 12 years. Yeah. I'm doing the math. And although obviously FogCon is named because San Francisco is famously foggy, they made up an acronym of Friends of Genre Convention. And it's an unusual science fiction convention in that it was created by a writer named Vylar Kaftan, and she decided to do something modeled on ReaderCon in the East Coast, which is a literary themed science fiction convention, and make a literary themed science fiction convention. And the first year it was in San Francisco, and then it moved to the East Bay in Walnut Creek, where it had a very congenial home for over a decade. And then, of course, COVID happened, but it has the distinction of being the last convention I went to before lockdown. It was like, 5 days before
lockdown? Yeah.
And so nobody got sick, and we all had a great time. And although one of the two guests of honor had to telecommute in, not because her doctor said that it would be unsafe to be at the con, but because flying might be unsafe, which turns out to have been true for March of 2020. So that was a little taste of lockdown, but mostly normal convention. And that was one of the ones Wendy was a chair of. So maybe we'll talk about like unforeseen circumstances and convention chairing. So Wendy, how did you get involved in behind the scenes work at conventions?
Well, so I think it was, in fact, I was in a writing group along with Vylar, so I had kind of a ringside seat on FogCon getting off the ground, and I wasn't really involved in running FogCon 1, but I did help out with one of the parties we did to promote it at WisCon a little bit, and kind of was involved in that, had a little bit of an idea of what was involved, and after attending the first FogCon in San Francisco, my husband turned to me as we were driving home and said, "That was really fun. Next year, let's volunteer for the ConCom." And so we did. And So that first year for FogCon 2, we ended up running the con suite as kind of our introduction to convention running. And then in subsequent years, I got involved with doing publications, with kind of keeping the IT side of things going, or helping to keep the IT side of things going. That's a big job for conventions. Chairing, doing logistics, and volunteering in the childcare suite. So I haven't quite worn all the hats for FogCon. I never got really involved in treasury or publicity, but possibly if we keep it going long enough, I may eventually fill every role.
Cool. My own experience, the kind of volunteering I did at FogCon was twofold. One, I volunteered to be on panels, as writers often do, but I also taught the writing workshop. Was one of the writer instructors, like one of usually 3 or 4, who taught the writing workshop for like, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years, something like that. So that was a lot of fun. I definitely did that. I know I did that right before lockdown. I remember doing that. That was the last writing workshop I taught in person. But let's talk about. So you were there at the beginning. So let's say, I took leave of my senses and I decided to create a convention from scratch. What would I do?
Well, I think
See a
the
shrink.
Let's say I didn't have enough money to pay the shrink, and instead I decided to run the convention.
yes, well, I recommend that if you start to run a convention that you set aside some additional money to pay a shrink. But I mean, it would be wonderful to have Vylar here to talk to this, because she was really in the nuts and bolts of it. But really, the first 2 jobs are to start recruiting a convention committee and raise some money. I suppose I should say I think the first job is you want to decide what do you want to do with this convention? What is it going to offer to the landscape of conventions that's different or special? Because there are a lot of conventions out there, and I think you need something to draw people in.
And I'll also say for our audience that what we're discussing right now is fan-run conventions as opposed to for-profit conventions. Like a lot of Star Trek or other media conventions are for-profit. And they, sorry, I was distracted by alternative theologies. A lot of are for-profit enterprises, but they grew out of, like, the first conventions were all fan conventions, and the World Science Fiction Conventions, which has been going strong with a brief interruption for World War II since 1939, is a large fan-run convention, for instance. But there are also local conventions or themed conventions, WisCon being, for example, a feminist science fiction convention, ReaderCon being a famous East Coast, Boston area literary themed science fiction convention, which leads us, both of those conventions kind of were the DNA that went into FogCon. So we're gonna, in this hour, talk some specifics about FogCon, but many of the things we talk about, it can be broadly applied to any convention. So Vylar had this idea of, like, let's do a West Coast ReaderCon. And let's model it on some of the best practices from WisCon, which has like 90-minute panels or 75-minute panels at 90-minute slots, rather than 50-minute panels in 1-hour slots, for instance, so you can dig deep and things like that. And you decided to keep it small, like size matters not, as Yoda might say. And so you had a small convention at first in San Francisco, and then how did you? If you started volunteering the first year of Walnut Creek, so the first year of FogCon was this nice hotel, really nice hotel in San Francisco with like no parking whatsoever.
Hmm.
So it's mostly it was locals going and not people staying at the con hotel. That was a challenge. So how did it move, and why did it move, and why would you move a convention from one hotel to another hotel?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot that went into that decision that I wasn't privy to, but the hotel in San Francisco, it was a nice hotel. It had some awkward things with the setup, like you needed a hotel room key to get into the elevator to get up to, for example, the con suite, which of course was a problem for the vast majority of people who weren't staying at the hotel, who were locals, who were just coming in for the day. And the hotel repeatedly said, yeah, we'll take care of it. We'll work something out. And they never worked anything out. So you had to kind of stand in the lobby and like flag people down who had a room key to let you up to the con suite, which, was a little awkward. Um, and of course, hotels in San Francisco are quite expensive. And, for a small convention, hotel costs are by far the biggest part of your budget. Um, I mean, what I can say, when we moved to the Marriott in Walnut Creek, um, they were much more willing to work with us, and be flexible. Um, and uh, they they seem to really enjoy having us there,
They
which
did.
is nice.
The
Yeah.
staff got ribbons and everything, which is
Yeah,
always
no, we ended up inviting the staff, uh a few years in. We had some staff who actually expressed interest in coming to the convention, so we worked out a deal where the Marriott staff could, on their off time, they could come down and get a badge and attend the convention, which was great. um so um yeah, I think you really need to find a hotel that uh suits your uh suits your convention and is willing to work with you.
yeah, and that was a very congenial relationship that we had. And they even did like they struck us a deal for like freer than later very low cost parking,
Hmm.
um, much lower than their normal rate, so that locals who didn't want to get a room could, park.
Park. Yeah.
And for which they were rewarded by like lots of restaurant sales and bar sales and the kinds of things that hotels also make money on.
Yeah, I think it was a mutually beneficial relationship, but
Yeah. So we had a question about writing workshops,
mhm.
and let me see if I can. Asked about PowerPoint, present the substance to the board of directors, or did you provide an outline? So it was a lot more informal than that. I've been a writing instructor at a couple of different cons, and in each case, there is someone on the, so cons have a committee, right? And there is a committee chair, which Wendy has been, and there are committee members, which Bob has been. And one of the people on the committee, if your convention has a writer's workshop, is the writer's workshop coordinator. And so in each of these cases, the writer's workshop coordinator said, hey, Cliff, do you want to teach writer's workshop? And that was it. And the writer's workshop was based on the Milford method, or which is also adopted by Clarion and Clarion West, where you get usually at a convention, not that many, because you only have a few hours, like maybe 3 to 6 students tops. Like 6 is a lot. Like 4 or 5 is kind of ideal. And everyone who signs up for the writers workshop, often they pay a small fee to do so, which one covers costs and two ensures commitment on the part of the person there. Because like if you're paying some money for something, you actually show up. They're supposed to submit a certain amount of writing sample, which is, I don't know, 3,000 to 5,000 words, something like that, a short story length. And then during the writing workshop, what I would do is first of all, I would give a little talk about, this is how I approached it. I would give a brief talk about how to do a writing workshop in a way that benefits writers and makes them feel good about themselves and their work, but also gives them information that will hopefully improve their work. And so I do a variation on the Milford method of critiquing, which you can look up on the internet if you want the specifics. But there's oh, there you go. Many Worlds or the Simulacra. That is a book I'm in. Buy it, read it, have fun. Okay. Anyway, and someone scanned the QR code. I'm so pleased. It's actually $25 for the print edition, but it's hand printed by lovely people and in a collective, and it's very collective minded. Anyway, so where was I? Oh yeah, so the writing workshop. And then we go around and critique each other's stories, and then as the instructor, I would be the last critiquer. And there's a certain time limit, so we could fit it all into the period. And then at the end of my writing workshops at a convention, which maybe lasts 3 hours, something like that, what I would do is I would say, okay, we got 30 minutes or whatever, Q&A about the publishing industry. Because it turns out that I know a fair bit about the publishing industry that a absolute beginner writer would not, because I've just been in the game so long. So I answer questions and do that. Usually because I'm not a senior level writer like New York Times bestseller or anything like that. So they would give me the junior people in the writing workshop, which was great because I can mold their minds, but but also I know a lot more about the industry than they do, so I can be useful to them at that stage in their career, which is the whole point of the writing workshop, is to be useful to people. And also for them to make friends or whatever, if they want to make friends with each other. So that's how a writing workshop works. You could do a PowerPoint presentation of something about some aspect of writing, but I do not. I just chat, and people like literally wrote things down in notepads. I use the past tense because since COVID, I have not done this. So it's been about 3 years. All right. So you've got your hotel contract. You have some amount of money, which hopefully will pay for the hotel. Now, I assume in an ideal world, even before you've sold memberships, you have enough money to pay the hotel, even if so that
in an ideal world, yeah. And we again, I wasn't intimately involved in that initial fundraising, but it was a combination of donations and grants. There are grants that various organizations do to help new conventions get off the ground.
Do you incorporate as a Bob? Can we get the little thing to vanish for a while? Do you incorporate as like a 501c3? Right
Yes.
We how long
we did do that.
take?
It I think it took a couple of years to complete the whole process. There is a lot of paperwork involved in setting it up. But
Sure.
that does mean once you incorporate as a 501c, you're a nonprofit, which means that people can donate to you and take a tax deduction, which makes it easier to get donations. And it also means that I think the treatment of your income as an organization is treated differently for tax purposes.
Sure.
Although, I imagine most conventions, certainly FogCon, we never generated a ton of profit. And anything we did make, we would just roll into the budget for the
Next
next
year.
year's convention.
Sure. Yeah. So, okay. So let's say you got your new convention. You've incorporated as a 501c3,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a hotel contract. Now, at some point, you need guests of honor so that you can draw people into the convention. And you also need a con committee,
Yeah.
right? So, talk about forming, because you did this as a con chair, forming your con committee, presumably largely made up of a combination of veterans and enthusiastic new people.
Yes.
And then talk about, like, how do you decide who to ask for guests and how do you go about that, and then how do you handle them when they arrive?
Yeah. So putting together your committee, I mean, it's largely uh networking. um uh I know, I think Vylar recruited everyone who had, any sort of organizational acumen or interest. um and we would tend to try to, as the years went on, we would tend to try to promote, if somebody volunteered for something small at the convention and they did a good job, we would try to recruit them to take on a little more responsibility the next year, maybe invite them to be part of the committee and take on a role. And I think one of the things that makes FogCon a bit different from maybe larger conventions is the committee is still pretty small.
About how many individuals?
Um, probably anywhere from I'm kind of visualizing maybe
There's an
15 to
org
20.
chart floating above your head. I can't.
Yeah, 15
Okay.
odd people, give or take. Uh, enough you can to small enough to fit in one decent sized conference room.
Fair.
And
And do you meet, like, once you book the hotel, do you meet at the hotel in advance of the con, or where?
oh yeah. There's a whole uh sort of pre-convention walkthrough where we go to the hotel space and um generally get walked around by their facilities people, and we do things like make sure that there are enough electrical outlets and that we can fit the right number of chairs in the rooms. And of course, one of the advantages to having an ongoing relationship with a hotel year after year is that you get to know the space. But of course, hotels are always renovating and changing. So there are always a few uh, opportunities for surprises. One of the first problems we had to rig up with the hotel is, we had this ballroom space set aside as the dealer's room, and the it wasn't set up so that you could lock it up at night.
Whoops.
Um,
And there are other guests at the hotel.
Yeah, there are other guests at the hotel. There are non-convention people, and the dealers have all their stock there. Because, it was one of these things where you have these big folding partitions
Right.
used to divide up the ballroom space. So one of our ConCom members, who was very handy, sort of rigged up this contraption that we could sort of use to slide through the door, and then you would crank it down and it would basically keep those sliding panels from coming open. So
Wow.
There's
Like
a lot
a
of
steering wheel
creativity
lock on a car to prevent car theft, something like that.
Yeah, it's similar idea, except that instead of like going through the steering wheel, it slides kind of through the gap between the doors, and then you kind of crank it down.
Nice.
Yeah. Um, so and I'm sure that the hotel was like, who are these crazy people with like homemade door locks and you know, but it worked.
Yeah. You never had a break-in, as far as I know.
Mm,
But to quote
no.
Corwin of Amber in Roger Zelazny's, I think it was Guns of Avalon, nobody steals books except your friends.
It's true.
Or nobody steals
Um,
books but your friends, something like that.
but yeah,
Bob,
actually, you asked about guests of honor, which I
yeah,
wanted
can
to.
we hold on that that
Yeah.
thought again? Because you've made me think of something I can ask Bob.
Yes.
Bob, so you were not a convention runner, but you were asked to join a convention committee and create a set of programming, a track for programming. So how did that come about? How did you join a concom, and how did you set about creating a subspace within that org chart?
Well, it was yeah. The thing was the writing aspect of a convention. It was a small regional convention that was made up mostly of friends, and they invited their friends, and there was a couple of 300 people would show up for it, mostly gamers, because that's how
Oh,
it got started. Well, uh, we wanted more writing at it, and so and that partially came about because we had local writers that were fairly well known, like Patricia Briggs, a wonderful woman. Need to have her on here some morning if I can break her free on a Sunday morning. The but So they said, Bob, go get us some writers. And so I went down to the writers' pen, but they'd all been adopted
what
out.
happened?
There weren't any.
You just give them the big
So
eyes.
yeah, and this was right after Phyllis Irene Radford had been a guest at our convention, and she and I were actually writing a book together at that time. So she
She's
said,
awesome.
"Here, come with me." And she took me to this convention in Seattle. I forget what Seattle's big convention's called.
Norwestcon?
Yeah. Well, no, not Norwestcon. Yeah, it was Norwestcon. And anyway, and I figured out real quick what color badge uh, ribbon that you stuck on a writer or a guest or a visiting pro. And so I had some business cards printed up, and I sat there in the restaurant. I don't know if you guys, those of you who've been there, know you have the nice tables right there at one point where you could sit there, and there was a bottleneck where everybody had to. Yeah, I chased Gardner Deswa halfway across that hotel. Uh,
Fortunately, he didn't run too fast at that point in his life.
no, he was fairly easy to catch. But and then she helped, and then she took me to Oricon. We're much the same, and I learned how to crash the publishers' parties.
That's
Uh,
a valuable skill for anyone.
yeah,
Right
it
in there.
is. You just and so I get in there, and I found Joe Haldeman in the corner with Gay, and said hi, and so that was how I did it. I just literally got their scent at a convention and then tracked them down and cornered them. And so many of them were thrilled. That was one of the things we did. Being young and dumb and not having a clue about it, I didn't have the built-in prejudice about the difference between a Joe Haldeman and a fellow like Jay Lake who had sold 12 short stories, uh, or two short stories or whatever.
Very, very early Joe Lake.
I invited you and got you at that convention. Now, here's what the fun part of it was. We got a huge number of writers who hadn't made it into the the market yet. Like Ken Scholes, he's got a 5 volume or a quad, whatever you call it. Yeah,
Yeah.
5 of them out
Pentology.
there. The
Pentology.
Lamentations, the Chronicles of Isaac. Jay Lake, who before he died was breaking big, you know. So we had a whole bunch of mid-list, soon to be mid-list writers that were got used to coming to our convention. Larry Niven, he loved our convention, and he came back on his own dime. Uh, a couple of times. It just so what you've got to do if you want to build writers, first you have to learn to sniff them out, and then you've got to go where there's alcohol, uh, and then
And
catch
free
them at
food.
their weak point, and have a good elevator speech. Anybody who thinks that elevator speeches are just for selling your books, no. Elevator speeches are for selling your convention. You have to be able to speak well of your convention and make somebody say. One of the writers we had was Dean Wesley Smith, and I forget his partner's name. She's a Christine Catherine Rush.
Catherine Rush.
Mhm.
Yeah, two wonderful people. And we I wound up convincing them to come, and they said we don't do conventions anymore. And I had my elevator speech about how different our convention was and why ours was, and they came back. Uh, and so the best thing you can have for your convention, I can't stress this enough, is satisfied guests. You know, if people walk away and say, "Man, that was some nice guys, but good God, nothing but a bunch of drunks roaming the hallways at night," it'll get out. If your dealer's room is poorly attended and people aren't selling, it will get out. If your panels are something that you copied out of a 3-year-old WorldCon program book, it will get out. If your writer's workshops are subpar and half the time your pros don't show up, it gets out. Um, so your best thing if you ever want to run a convention is run a damn convention. Do it right. Make it where the people have a reason to come back. Give them something to talk about. All the writers, all everybody who's ever run a convention or programming or anything like that will always get that nice email from a writer saying, "I thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate it, and I very much enjoyed myself as much as I have at any convention I've been to in years." And then you can put that and $3 and get yourself a cup of coffee at many places. Now, when you see them telling people that, when you're at another convention and they see you and they reach out to their buddy and they put their arms, say, "Hey, you gotta meet this Wendy Shaffer. She runs this great convention. That's the one you need to go to." That's when you know you're succeeding, and that's your objective. And oh yeah, anyway, in answer to your question, the way you build a programming scheme like that is you get qualified people, ask them what they want to do, and then let them.
Cool.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was getting off on one of my lecture modes, and I could sense it, and I realized it was time to let Cliff have his show back.
Oh, no worries. No, that was all interesting. Um, and you segued, and I'm going to ruin the smoothness. You segued nicely into my asking Wendy about guests of honor. And someone in the audience asked about artist guests as well. So let's talk about okay, you've got your convention staff, you've got some donations, you're incorporated, you've hired Bob to do your elevator pitches, and you've got a hotel. Now, maybe you've run the convention a couple years, but it's time for the next year and you need guests. First of all, how do you figure out what guests you're going to get, and how far in advance do you need to book the guests of honor, which is a
Oh,
separate category for people who don't know? a guest of honor is one of up to a half dozen people that the convention has decided to really will bring in people and bring in the audience, and the guest of honor do more panels than everyone else for the most part. And they have special, like, let's spend an hour interviewing your guest of honor in this category or whatever thing. And also the hotel generally pays their transportation, or the convention generally pays their transportation. And I assume in the deal with the hotel, some rooms set aside for guests of honor as part of that deal. So in effect, the convention pays for the hotel room for the guests of honor.
Yes, and I think when we were a young convention, not yet well established, the attraction of a paid trip to the Bay Area in March was a pretty good draw for some guests, some honored guests who live in parts of the country with less pleasant weather.
Oh, I like that. So like the Midwest or the
yeah. I mean, I don't know for sure, but yeah, I mean, I do want to say everything Bob said was spot on. So I'll talk to a few of the FogCon specific things. So actually, finding your honored guests is one of the first things we would do. So after a convention would finish, we would sort of all fall over for a month or two, and then kind of pick up planning for the next convention. And one of the things about FogCon is it had a theme every year. So the theme was great because it would guide both our choice of honored guests and to some extent our programming in general. So once we had decided on a theme for the convention, which we would try to choose even before we would try to have the theme for the next year even before the convention for the current year was done.
Cool.
We would go through a brainstorming process of like, okay, if our theme is the city, which was an early FogCon theme.
I remember that
first one.
Was the City in the City the book for that one, or was it what was the book? City Not Long After, some city book.
So yeah.
Anyway.
Who comes to mind when we think of
so which author would fit the theme, which painter would fit the theme, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And we'd compile a list among the committee, and usually try to rank them based on who fits the theme, who is going to be a good draw, who makes it, some writers just have a reputation for being fantastic guests. So we take that into account, and then there is the personal element of who do the people on the committee really want to fangirl over, or fanboy over. Can
I jump in for 1 second?
Yeah.
And just point out to people who are either writers or artists or knowledgeable on a subject area and have been or want to be guests at a convention. So like I said, there's the two tiers: guests of honor and guests. Guests often get free or discounted membership to the convention, and they're part of programming. And one thing and I've been a guest at a whole lot of conventions over the years, and one thing you really want to do as a guest is focus on the fact that you're there in a professional capacity, whether it's like you happen to be a physicist and you're just going to be on the science panels, or you're a writer and you're going to be on all the writing panels, or whatever. Be professional, be courteous. Remember when you're on a panel that the audience of the panel is your audience and you're there to entertain them, right? And don't get a reputation for being hard to work with. Get a reputation for being easy to work with. And then when people like Wendy are running a convention and they're chatting with the Concom about who they want for a guest of honor, when you've gotten to a certain point in your career. And some conventions, again, they have like a writer guest, an artist guest, maybe a musical guest, and sometimes like a scientist guest, depending on the convention. So you could just be like a chemistry professor at a local university, and suddenly you're a convention guest of honor because you've been a panelist at like 15 conventions and have developed a reputation of being both entertaining and easy to work with. So moving on back to Wendy. I just wanted to insert that from the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
You were talking about fanboying and fangirling.
Fanboying and fangirling. Yeah. And so yeah, then we would just go through our list and our head of programming would send out nice polite email saying, hey, this is FogCon, this is when it is, we would love to have you as our honored guests, and are you interested? And we usually get a pretty favorable response. There are definitely a few sort of holy grail guests that we would love to have that we haven't managed to land, but
Sure. I mean, yeah. And I guess in some cases, there's a liaison between you and the guest at first contact, right? Like if they're a particularly well-known guest, it might be their agent or someone else that you're dealing with to try and get them.
Yeah.
Like if you wanted John Scalzi, for instance, or something like that, or Neil Gaiman. Right, you would probably not call up Neil Gaiman and talk to him directly.
Yeah, actually, I mean, Neil Gaiman is an example of a guest where there was one year when we considered inviting him, and we were like, we're too small a convention for Neil Gaiman. He would just overwhelm us. So there is also that element.
Sure. So the next question I have is: so you've reached out to your guests of honor, and they've said yes, and you have booked their travel arrangements for them. You worked with them to do that and paid for their, plane fare or whatever. If they're local, maybe their train fare or something like that. And they're about to arrive. Now you need, for your guests of honor, a guest liaison, right? For
yes.
guest. So how does that work?
Well, it's it's a position on the con committee. Kind of, I mean, I think in our initial days when we were very small, somebody in the programming committee would handle that, and then in later years we actually had a specially designated guest liaison. Honestly, I don't know a whole lot about how that works, because that is one of the areas where we have just gotten really good people to do it, and I have stayed out of their way.
That's good con sharing right there.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, you need somebody who is organized and conscientious and personable, and also just prepared to roll with things like flight delays and transportation snafus and other things, and
doesn't get deer in the headlights with star power, right?
Right. Yeah.
That, because there are some guests who are wonderful guests, but they can roll over people without realizing that, because their personalities are like that. They're very larger than life people.
Yeah.
So you got to have someone who can like stand up to the guests and like, no, we can't do that because we have to get you to this panel right now, and that sort of thing, and do it polite.
I don't have any good difficult honored guest stories.
Yay!
Our honored guests have been I mean, honestly, I'm I'm astonished by, um, just how sweet and charming and easygoing so many of our guests have been. Um,
So we have one question. So we're gonna answer this one question, and then we're gonna move on to funny stories.
okay.
So giving my guests a head up. That includes you too, Bob, even though you're hiding. Oh, actually, there's a new question just came in. So the questions are: do you have criteria for selecting your guests of honor? And then uh, and then a specific thing about Neil Gaiman. Um, that's likening it like, yeah, you have to figure out the finances when you have a guest like Neil Gaiman and the
Mhm.
space and all of that. Yes, absolutely. So if you're a bigger convention, you have to anticipate the crowd size and crowd management. I think that answers that question. But anyway, so what about like the criteria for choosing guests? Obviously, we've discussed the criterion of can you get them,
Mhm.
right? Um, and which includes like luring them in from bad weather areas to a good weather area. But also, as Bob said, selling them on the convention. Like
Mhm.
you get a pretty big name author by telling them this is a small convention with a lot of writers and readers,
Mhm.
right? That'll suck in a big name author because maybe they're just sort of very literary focused, and a convention, where people are dressed as Klingons is fine, but it's not what they're interested in. So maybe that would do it. But other than that, and easy to work with, right? Those
Mhm.
are any other criteria for any guests of honor that you would care to mention?
I mean, again, fitting in with the theme in some aspects, and um, I think FogCon, we were always a very programming focused convention in that we put a lot of attention into putting together good panels. So a guest of honor that we knew would be a good panelist, or that we could put together some really interesting programming around. Like one of my personal proudest programming moments at FogCon was the year we had Kat Valenti as our honored guest. Um, I had remembered seeing a tweet from Kat um, where she talked about um, it was around when her novel Palimpsest came out, and how much she just really liked the idea of writing on people's skin. So I proposed a panel that was Kat Valenti writes on your skin. um,
That's fabulous.
and and like it was like, I mean, that wasn't the clincher for having
For getting her.
for getting her, but um
I mean, Cat Valenti does live in Maine, so coming to the
yeah,
Bay Area in March is a big draw.
is a big draw. But I think uh really getting a guest of honor where
Mhm.
you can really do something special with the programming uh that that really speaks to their work, or allows them to engage with fans on a level beyond just kind of the standard, like, fantasy 101 panel or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, I like that. Okay. Funny stories. Bob, do you have a funny story?
I always have funny stories. Depends on which ones you want.
The ones we can safely air on the internet.
Well, there was this one time I was with Cliff. We were at this convention.
Not that one. Not that one.
We used to say, what happens at RadCon stays at RadCon. But no, it is the best thing I can advise for those of you putting on a convention is on the front end, don't take yourself too seriously. On the back end, take it seriously. Uh, you got to manage it. But the best conventions you'll ever see are the ones that you don't look like anybody's doing anything. You know, when you see a convention where you got the con chair, program director, and three ops people are all running around, oh my God, you know, um, you get the sense they're really working at it, but you also should get the sense, oh. Um, but no, the fun part about it is just little things. You never know what's going to work and what's not going to work. Um, I am a firm believer in a few things. I'm a firm believer in opening ceremonies that is entertaining. You know, I duck most convention opening ceremonies because I dread a full hour and a half of my time spent watching people stand up there and go through a few inside jokes and tell each other how much they love each other and um, but it's just God, it's just like okay. Or going into hospitality and getting an off-brand soda and a bag of chips. Ooh, thank you. Uh, my first gig at conventions was hospitality. Uh,
I could see you being very good at that.
you give them food. We made a deal with hotel, let us do it, and we brought in pizza.
Mm.
And we had like four pizza ovens, and we gave the guys the pizza at cost by the slice. Didn't make a nickel, didn't try to make a nickel, just tried not to lose too much. Hotel was good for it because their restaurant facilities were somewhat limited, and it kept and they were still making good money. So hospitality, feed people as cheap as you can, and if you can, always have something there for free. Um, you know,
That's in the convention suite.
yeah, because
Yeah.
hospitality can make or break a convention. The Always have something to do. Have your schedules accessible. We were one of the first conventions that went out and got down to the print shop and had newspaper sheets uh, printed up with our schedules, and we hung them everywhere we had a hallway. Cost us less than $50, and people loved it until you had to
Sure.
change something, and you're running around with your little marker pen. But and have fun guests. One of the I'm not going to mention Carol's name, or all of her name, but we were running a hospitality where we had C.J. Sherry and Larry Niven were our bartenders.
Oh, nice.
Two
Nice.
wonderful bartenders, and I had this woman that she also was a weightlifter, and so she was manning the door to not let people in without showing their ID. When the police showed up to check on our establishment, she's sitting there in her chair. She plops one leg up against the door, blocking the entry, looks up at him and says, "You can't come in without ID." Uh,
Good for
uh,
her.
no, no. Huh. Let him in.
That's
Let him in now. Uh,
hilarious.
and it helped that she was an adorable human being, but she was not gonna let the police come and inspect our liquor serving establishment, and that's one of the little pieces. Um, Parties that serve liquor, places that will want to sell liquor, are all some of the nightmare headaches that affect conventions. If you're really lucky, everybody plays nice and nobody cares if there's a room party that's serving a little bit of liquor. Now you get somebody's always got the idea that they can set up a big room party at your hotel, at your convention, and sell people liquor there and make money. You need to find those people, pull their toenails out, staple them to their forehead so everybody can see what happened to their toenails, and kick them the hell out. your convention doesn't need people out there trying to profiteer off of your bringing people together in a way that's going to negatively affect your convention. I mean, one of them actually had the audacity to want me to give them the main ballroom so they could set up a pole dancing exhibition, sell memberships and alcohol. And it's like, you what?
Wow.
Well,
Uh,
at least they asked.
Ah,
FogCon
well,
is relatively tame in terms of the room party scene. There was one year where somebody tried to sell weed to our con chair and several of the other guests, but when he tried to sell weed to the con chair, I think he was summarily ejected. Um,
Yep.
but
The wrong person to try and pick the wrong week to quit sniffing glue. I don't know.
yeah.
So tell me a funny story, Wendy, and then we'll have to go. Oh, I will say one thing to Bob's point about opening and closing ceremonies. If your convention guests of honor include a Toastmaster, choose wisely. Choose someone who is enormously entertaining, and they will make the opening and closing ceremonies enormously entertaining. But anyway, Wendy, funny story, anything.
Funny story.
Insightful story.
I mean, I will always remember the year when the refrigerator in the con suite broke down overnight, and we basically had to throw out an entire con suite's worth of perishables.
Tell me it wasn't the first night of the convention.
No, I think it was the second night of the convention. And yeah, we were able to muddle through that somehow. But yeah, I have a lot of funny con suite stories. I think my favorite story was when I worked con suite the first year. For some reason, we decided that brewing coffee in a French press was the way to go. And like, I don't know if you've ever brewed coffee in a French press. It's one of my favorite ways of brewing coffee.
I
But
remember that being there. Yes.
It's a little fiddly. And so I would get there in the morning to start brewing coffee and decant it into a thermos. And I would usually end up with a crowd of people around me waiting for the coffee to steep. And so we would end up doing a countdown. I would go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I would plunge the plunger on the French press and like dole out the first few cups of coffee and then start brewing a new one.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a bottleneck. French press is a bottleneck
Is
for
a
bad
bottleneck.
coffee production.
Yeah, I mean, I think it actually worked when the convention was sufficiently small, but we very quickly outgrew that. And but yes, it added to the festive atmosphere in the con suite that year.
All right. For those in our live studio audience, Theo has said a couple of amusing con stories, but we are out of time, so I will just leave those to be read and enjoyed by the live studio audience.
I gotta say, Theo, respect. That sounds like some
yeah.
tough,
Well, one of the elderly guests of honor whose meds were causing paranoia, pulling a knife on.
Yeah.
That's okay. All right.
Well, we are running out of time, so I'm just going to remind people next week is the last Sunday. I think. Yes,
it is.
Last Sunday. And that means we've got David Gerald and Jim Wright. David Gerald is, he's got his big moving sale going on. And so you need to get over there and check it out. You can get scripts and stuff and good deals on his books, and he's got some great books. And so you go to David Gerald's Patreon page. I can't give you the link; it's not in my brain. But if you
come back next week, I'll tell you.
Yeah, it's a good one. He'll be up here next week, and Jim Wright, fresh back from his tour of Death Valley and everything that's in the Southwest. Beautiful pictures, wonderful
Yeah.
pictures. He is possibly the greatest wildlife photographer I know. I'm not saying he's the greatest one ever. He's just the greatest one I know.
He's really
Um,
good. And follow him on Instagram or the site formerly known as Twitter, and you can see some of his great wildlife photography.
I hope that somebody here wrote a note says they hope Jim's well enough to attend. You know, if Jim can crawl to the computer room and climb into his chair, he'll get a little stand that he can lean his chin on, and he'll go. I mean, he's just that kind of trooper. Um, you don't get to be uh, do what he did without being that way, and also just incredible writer. But they're going to be here next week, and just a reminder on those of you who have been submitting to BQ Press. We're getting Madam President. We're getting the final edits put together so that we can have that out hopefully this fall, a little early. And we are continuing our reading for uh, Alternative Truths, Alternative Truths Southern Edition, bless their hearts. We've extended that and Alternative Leadership both because we have had so many good submissions that we haven't got done reading, and I got a little backlog. And I said, well, you know what? If I'm not going to read it for 2 months or get finished reading for 2 months, why would I tell people to stop writing? So I extended them both so people had more time on those. And then we are getting Scott's Planet is coming into the final selection process. And then last but not least, breaking up our great trilogy novel that BQ Press is putting out about the breakup of the United States, efforts to break it up by certain red, white, and blue campaign poster people. I can't remember who they would be. Freaking Republicans. Hey, it's my show. I can be as political as I want.
You can.
They, just watching those guys. But it's great therapy to write a book where you get to give them their comeuppance. And it is a lot of fun, and we have some great writers working on it, including Frog Jones, David Gerald, and somebody you may never have heard of, but Daniel Bartlett, and who teaches writing down in Galveston. And so a writing teacher out of Texas has been very good to have on the team. And then Rachel Robinson brings the heart of Chicago to this book very well. So we're really looking forward to it and looking to get them all on the table so we can sell them to you and make enough money that I can hire Cliff to do this show and I'll just watch.
Anyway, I'm all for that, especially if you pay me to.
The higher part.
Yeah.
The higher part is matters a lot in publishing, you know. Whenever David Gerald, I'm dropping his name because I like him. He's
very likable.
He is, I know, he acts like he's such a curmudgeon.
Yeah.
My ass.
Yeah.
He's a good human being.
He's an old softy.
He's just got standards. He expects people to act in a certain way, like people. But I sometimes get the sense he only likes me because I pay him promptly. And anybody who's thinking of doing small press, remember, that is the best thing you can ever do. Pay the frickin' writers promptly. Don't be like the movie studios. Be willing to pay your writers, pay your people.
As a writer, I can confirm everything Bob just said.
So you guys take care, and we are out of here.